Hello, this is Cheryl, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 7th issue of the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In a Washington Post exclusive, breaking news. After clashes with Hegseth, Army Secretary says he isn't going anywhere. Dan Driscoll, praised by the White House for his efforts during the Iran war, said in a statement to the Washington Post that, "I have no plans to depart or resign as Secretary of the Army." By Dan Lamothe. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll has no plans to resign or otherwise leave his role at the Pentagon, he said in a statement to the Washington Post on Tuesday, after a series of internal clashes with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth that have caused other U.S. officials to question how long they can coexist. Driscoll's statement follows last week's abrupt ouster of the Army's top officer, General Randy George, and two other senior military leaders, and as Hegseth's top spokesman, Sean Parnell, has privately told colleagues that he is interested in Driscoll's job should it become open, according to officials familiar with the matter. Hegseth and Driscoll have disagreed on numerous issues, including Hegseth's moves to block the promotions of several Army officers, said these people, who, like some others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the men's relationship. Serving under President Donald Trump has been the honor of a lifetime, and I remain laser-focused on providing America with the strongest land fighting force the world has ever seen, Driscoll said in his statement to the Post, which has not previously been reported. I have no plans to depart or resign as the Secretary of the Army. The White House, in a separate statement, appeared to back Driscoll, who is close friends with Vice President J.D. Vance, while touting the Army's role in the Trump administration's weeks-long war with Iran. President Donald Trump has effectively restored a focus on readiness and lethality across our military with the help of leaders like Secretary Driscoll, said Anna Kelly, a White House spokeswoman. The extraordinary talent of the United States Army is on full display as our warfighters meet or exceed all of their benchmarks under Operation Epic Fury, and Iran's military capabilities diminish more every day. Parnell, Hegseth's spokesman, declined to address questions about his interest in the Army Secretary job and disputed assertions that there is any tension between Hegseth and Driscoll. In a statement, he said that Hegseth maintains excellent working relationships with the secretaries of every military service branch, including Army Secretary Dan Driscoll. Other officials who've observed the men's dynamic said that characterization is inaccurate. They noted that friction between the two dates back at least a year to last spring, when Driscoll's name was floated within the Trump administration as a potential replacement for Hegseth. The defense secretary was struggling at the time to gain his footing amid a number of controversies and other upheaval that consumed much of his first year in the role. Trump has stuck with Hegseth despite those troubles, telling reporters recently that the former Fox News personality and mid-ranking officer in the Army National Guard was born for this role. Defense officials aligned with Hegseth have touted Parnell as a viable candidate for Army Secretary. As Pentagon spokesman and aide to the Secretary, he has championed Hegseth's disdain for the news media and was tasked with overseeing a review of how the chaotic U.S. evacuation of Afghanistan 5 years ago ended. Before joining the administration, Parnell ran for a House seat in Pennsylvania in 2020, narrowly losing, and for Senate the following year. He was endorsed by Trump, but suspended his campaign amid a bruising legal dispute with his estranged wife. Parnell denied any wrongdoing. One senior Pentagon official, citing Parnell's combat experience as an infantry platoon leader in Afghanistan about 20 years ago, told the Post that Parnell would excel as Army Secretary. Driscoll, this official asserted, has focused too much on his political future instead of the service secretary's role to manage the training and equipping of soldiers. Army officials declined to address the assertion, referring questions to Hegseth's team and the White House. 3 people familiar with the situation who were interviewed for this report disputed the suggestion that Driscoll, who worked in venture capital and ran an unsuccessful congressional campaign in 2020 before joining the Trump administration, has performed poorly in the role. One said that Driscoll, who led an Army cavalry scout platoon during the Iraq War, has made a ton of institutional changes and stayed out of things that the military shouldn't touch, especially with culture wars. The New York Post reported Friday that Parnell could replace Driscoll if the job becomes available. Driscoll has been concerned enough about his deteriorating relationship with Hegseth that he sought assistance in the fall from Vance, a close friend dating back to law school, 3 people with the matter said. Last week's dismissal of George, the Army's top general, had been months in the making, officials said. Hegseth voiced interest last year in removing him, but Driscoll found ways to short-circuit those discussions, the officials said. There have been multiple instances where Secretary Hegseth has tried to remove George, and Driscoll has said, "No, he's done nothing wrong. He's good," one official said. Driscoll has been very clear that merit should speak for itself. It is not clear whether Vance ever intervened on Driscoll's behalf. The Vice President's office declined to comment. In his response to questions from the Post, Parnell said that Hegseth and Vance, who served in the Marines during the Iraq War, are fully aligned in executing President Trump's America First agenda, and that the two work seamlessly together and share a strong mutual respect. George's ouster is the latest in a series of removals targeting senior military leaders as Hegseth seeks to consolidate power at the Pentagon. The general was asked to retire early during a phone call with the Defense Secretary on Thursday, officials said. Within minutes, Hegseth's decision leaked to CBS News, which was first to report on George's dismissal, effectively forestalling any effort by Driscoll to save the general's career before the decision was publicized, officials said. Hegseth last week also ousted General David Hodney, who last fall became head of the Army's new Transformation and Training Command in Austin, and Major General William Green, Jr., the head of the Army chaplains. Like George, neither officer could be reached for comment. In many cases, the firings and forced removals carried out by Hegseth have occurred without explanation, though he has long criticized senior military leaders who championed diversity initiatives or exhibited what, in his view, was a lack of loyalty to Trump. A disproportionate number of those targeted by Hegseth have been women and minorities. George, 61, rose to the top spot in the Army in September 2023 under President Joe Biden after serving numerous combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and earning a Purple Heart. The nonpartisan role typically spans 4 years across presidential administrations. George was long seen as a target for firing, not only because he was selected to lead the Army by the previous administration, but because he had served as the senior military assistant to Biden's Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. He has also spoken favorably of diversity training for military personnel, telling lawmakers during his confirmation hearing that it is one component in a broader effort to build cohesive teams. George and Driscoll appeared to connect with one another over their shared desire to overhaul the Army for future conflict. Driscoll was enthusiastic about an effort George had launched during the Biden administration to continually experiment with and adopt drones and other emerging technology. The two traveled together to Ukraine last fall, in part to gather lessons learned from the war, officials said. Hegseth has shown a particular interest in removing Army generals who had worked under retired General Mark A. Milley, the Joint Chiefs Chairman during Trump's first term in office, who clashed with the president repeatedly. Amid the purge, George's survival at times prompted others to question whether he was doing enough to shield the Army from politics. The wife of one Army general removed last year told the Post that she and her husband felt disrespected by George and other senior officials. The spouse, speaking on the condition of anonymity due to concerns about her career, said she hopes that George is treated with more respect and dignity during this difficult time than was shown to my husband. What precisely precipitated George's ouster now remains unclear. In the last weeks of his tenure as Army Chief of Staff, he encountered at least two hotly politicized issues. Hegseth's decision, first reported by the New York Times, to block the promotion of two black and two female officers who were up for promotion to one-star general, and the controversial appearance of Apache helicopters outside the Tennessee home of musician Kid Rock, an enthusiastic Trump supporter. George sought a meeting with Hegseth to discuss the blocked promotions, but was rebuffed, officials said. The incident involving Kid Rock led to an investigation, with the Army grounding two helicopter crews involved. Hegseth soon rescinded the suspensions and quashed the probe. George, with more than 40 years in the Army, favored letting the investigation play out, two people familiar with the matter said. It shouldn't be a surprise, said one official, that a man who enlisted at the age of 18, later commissioned as an officer, and spent his entire adult life in the military would be committed to standards and discipline. Driscoll has not commented publicly on either incident. And continuing from the headlines, Trump says a whole civilization will die as Iran freezes talks. The president said Iran must open the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. Eastern Time or face destruction. The White House said the administration would not use nuclear weapons. By Isaac Arnsdorf, Sammy Westphal, and Tara Kopp. President Donald Trump threatened to wipe out a whole civilization if Iran's leaders don't agree to his terms to open the Strait of Hormuz, prompting Iran to call off talks and his political opponents to question his fitness for office and call for his removal. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, he wrote Tuesday morning, 12 hours before his 8 p.m. deadline for Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. The White House clarified Trump was not considering the use of nuclear weapons. Only the president knows where things stand and what he will do, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement. Vice President J.D. Vance said Tuesday that the United States expected Iran to respond to Trump's demands before the end of the day. They've got to know we've got tools in our toolkit that we so far haven't decided to use, Vance said in Budapest, where he is pushing for the re-election of right-wing Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. The President of the United States can decide to use them, and he will decide to use them if the Iranians don't change their course of conduct. A Democratic social media account run by an alumni of Kamala Harris's presidential campaign said Vance had implied Trump might use nuclear weapons. The White House responded that he did not. Iran has showed no signs of willingness to surrender to Trump's threats, saying U.S. attacks would be met with a strong response. Deadlines shouldn't cause us to have the slightest doubt in defending our country, Esmail Baikeh, a spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry, said Monday. Kazim Karababadi, a deputy foreign minister, said Iran would retaliate with a regret-inducing response. Pakistan, which has been mediating between the United States and Iran, urged Trump to extend his deadline by 2 weeks, and Tehran to open the Strait of Hormuz for a corresponding window to allow more time for diplomatic settlement. We also urge all warring parties to observe a ceasefire everywhere for 2 weeks to allow diplomacy to achieve conclusive termination of war in the interest of long-term peace and stability in the region. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said in a statement Tuesday. Democratic lawmakers said Congress should stop the war from escalating. Former Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and the NAACP called for Trump's removal through the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, under which the president can be removed from power, including by the vice president and a majority of the cabinet, if they determine him to be unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. This is evil and madness, Greene said on X. House Democratic leadership said in a statement that Trump was completely unhinged and called for the House to come back into session immediately and vote on an end to the war. Trump's post came on the heels of overnight U.S. strikes on Karg Island, the core of Iran's oil economy. The strikes, which began about 2 a.m. Eastern Time, hit military targets such as runways and bunkers, but not the island's oil infrastructure, two officials told the Washington Post, speaking on the condition of anonymity to provide details not yet made public. No ground forces were involved, they said. One of the officials said the targets struck included areas the U.S. had hit under earlier military operations. One of the officials also confirmed that on Sunday, the U.S. used several of its bunker buster bombs to hit Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps leadership in a deep underground facility. The official would not provide an assessment of what IRGC leadership had been hit, saying the information was classified. The GBU-57 MOP is a 30,000-pound bomb that can strike hundreds of feet underground. It was first used in combat last year against Iranian nuclear targets and is carried by the B-2 stealth bomber. It is one of the largest non-nuclear bombs in the U.S. arsenal. Trump has claimed to have accomplished regime change in Iran, but regional and Western officials say that the country's hardline government remains largely intact and is prepared to drive a hard bargain in negotiations to end the war, including a demand for full control over the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passageway that is vital to global oil shipments. More than 14 million proud Iranians have so far registered to sacrifice their lives to defend Iran. I too have been, am, and will remain devoted to giving my life for Iran, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian wrote Tuesday on X. Iranian official and semi-official news agencies published images and video of what they said showed Iranians forming human chains around power plants on Tuesday. Iranians, including young people, gathered in lines outside the power plants holding flags and signs, the photo showed. The Post could not independently verify the images. Trump has made threats at times seeming to aim for negotiating advantage, but the warning against the entire nation of Iran, with a population of 93 million, was remarkable for a world leader, particularly one who has laid claims to being a peacemaker. Trump called Tuesday night one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world in his post. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end, he wrote. Vance said he was confident that the United States will get a response, whether it's positive or negative, from Iran by 8 p.m. Tuesday. I hope they make the right response, he said in Budapest. Vance said the U.S. wants a world where oil and gas is flowing freely, which he said won't happen if Iran engages in acts of economic terrorism. Israel attacked train tracks and bridges in Iran, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a video statement Tuesday. He said they were used by the IRGC. The Israel Defense Forces said Tuesday that it had targeted 8 Iran bridges. IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Majid Mousavi said Tuesday that in a new stage of war, Iran will unleash strikes using dual launchers which will multiply strikes by 2, the semi-official Iranian Tusam news agency reported. Westphal reported from Jerusalem. Arnsdorf and Kopp reported from Washington. Suzanne Hadamos in Beirut and Heba Farouk Mahfouz in Cairo contributed to this report. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing from the headlines. Trump threats against civilian targets put military in legal, moral quandary. President Donald Trump said the United States would target every Iranian bridge and power plant. Experts said such blanket action violates international law. By Adam Taylor and Ellen Nakashima. President Donald Trump spent Monday fending off questions about whether his threat to bomb every bridge and power plant in Iran would amount to war crimes. He rejected the premise, arguing that Iran's leaders were animals who needed to be stopped. On Tuesday morning, he doubled down. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, Trump wrote on Truth Social, his social media platform. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. Such seemingly unrestrained statements have alarmed legal experts and former military officials who argue that the president's threat to conduct broad attacks on civilian infrastructure, very little is off limits, he said Monday, could undermine America's aims in Iran and create legal jeopardy for military leadership. I'm concerned that the president's bombast is putting the operational commanders in a very difficult position, said Jeffrey Korn, who served as a top law of war expert at the U.S. Army in Iraq in 2004 to 2005. They know that you cannot just draw a circle around the country and say every element of that electrical grid is now a lawful target. Jamil Yaffer, a longtime human rights lawyer and lecturer at Columbia University, said Trump's latest threat to extinguish a whole civilization meets the very definition of terrorism, to seek to achieve political ends through violence or threats of violence directed at civilians. He noted that the Pentagon's own Law of War manual clearly prohibits threats of violence whose primary purpose is to spread terror among civilians. Military personnel, Jaffer said, have an obligation not to carry out orders they know to be unlawful. Until now, the United States largely has been hitting military targets in Iran, such as ammunition depots, ballistic missile manufacturing facilities, mobile launchers, and naval ships. But Trump has threatened that, as of Tuesday, 8 p.m., he will order the military to target clearly civilian facilities and do so indiscriminately, rather than weigh whether each is a valid military target whose destruction would not cause undue civilian harm. International humanitarian law protects from attack objects indispensable to the survival of civilians, so if implemented, the attacks Trump threatens could constitute war crimes, said Harold Hungju Ko, a former State Department legal advisor in the Obama administration and now the Sterling Professor of International Law at Yale Law School. International humanitarian law, also known as the law of war or armed conflict, is a set of rules that place limits on how countries fight. They have been developed through various treaties and agreements since 1864, when the first Geneva Convention was adopted. In the U.S., decisions on which targets to hit are traditionally made at the combatant command level, U.S. Central Command in this case, with lawyers advising on whether a target is valid under the law of armed conflict, said Michael W. Meyer, a former Army law of war advisor. In a normal administration, these decisions are made at that level, not the presidential level, he said. Trump's threats come amid a general loosening of legal guardrails by the administration since it has taken office. Officials have fired the top uniformed legal officers known as Judge Advocates General and repeatedly circumvented traditional routes for military legal advice. The Pentagon referred a request for comment to the White House. The White House declined to answer specific questions, but in a statement, spokesperson Anna Kelly said that Trump would always stand with innocent civilians while annihilating the terrorists responsible for threatening our country and the entire world with a nuclear weapon. The Iranian people welcome the sound of bombs because it means their oppressors are losing, Kelly said. Greater destruction can be avoided if the regime understands the seriousness of this moment and makes a deal with the United States. Trump regularly evinces little regard for norms like human rights or the rules of law. I don't need international law, he told the New York Times in January, 11 months after his administration placed sanctions on global bodies, including the International Criminal Court. Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has long supported U.S. military members accused or convicted of war crimes. He has claimed that the U.S. would take its gloves off in military conflict and show no quarter to its enemies, alarming some legal experts. Both Trump and Hegseth have supported strikes against alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific Ocean that critics have said were likely breaches of U.S. law and potentially crimes against humanity, for which U.S. officials and service members could face charges in foreign courts and international tribunals. Experts say that indiscriminately targeting civilian infrastructure, even if it may be used for some military purpose, such as a power plant that supplies electricity to a military base, risks the U.S. carrying out the very type of attacks that harm innocents. Trump's comments were blatant expressions that he is willing to turn the United States into a rogue state like Iran and Russia, two former military lawyers, Margaret Donovan and Rachel Van Landingham, wrote for Just Security in an article published on Monday. Power plants and bridges can certainly be lawful targets if they are serving a military purpose. So-called dual-use infrastructure, said Todd Huntley, director of the National Security Law Program at Georgetown University and a former military lawyer supporting special operations. But the impact on civilians must be carefully considered and expected not to be excessive compared to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated from the strike, Donovan and Van Landingham wrote. Blowing up bridges to force the enemy to the negotiating table does not offer a definitive military advantage, Huntley said. Some analysts say that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the primary military and intelligence force that essentially controls Iran's regime, is so deeply intertwined with the broader economy that it makes distinctions between military and civilian targets harder to gauge. But a careful evaluation of targets, their military value, and the potential harm to civilians is still needed, these analysts say. No matter how much the regime has hidden missiles in tunnels of transported weapons over bridges or via airports, it is incumbent upon the Trump administration to make its case legally and rationally about every single target, said Banem Ben Tablu, senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a D.C. think tank that favors military action against Iran. Trump has escalated his threats against civilian sites in Iran in recent days amid his growing frustration that Tehran has been unwilling to agree to a deal to end a war that is now in its fifth week, despite taking enormous damage to military sites and seeing much of its political leadership assassinated. Trump has given Iran the 8 p.m. deadline to reopen the crucial Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil and gas passes. If it does not, Trump vowed that by midnight every bridge would be decimated, every power plant would be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. The U.S. has largely avoided directly targeting civilian infrastructure since it and Israel jointly started a war against Iran on February 28. but an analysis by human rights groups released last month estimated that at least 1,400 civilians have been killed so far in strikes near schools, hospitals, and other non-military infrastructure. Any forbearance may be fading. The U.S. last week struck the unfinished B-1 bridge in Karaj, Iran, causing it to partially collapse, according to local media. Trump appeared to revel in the strike, posting a video of it to social media and writing, "Much more to follow." In response, Iran alleged that the U.S. is already committing war crimes, even as the Iranian military targets civilian sites, including hotels and residential buildings across the Middle East. To threaten a country with attacks on its energy and industrial infrastructure at various intervals constitutes a war crime under international humanitarian law, said Ismail Baqai, a spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry, according to a report in Fars News. More than 100 legal experts, in a letter released last week, said that by unilaterally going to war, the Trump administration was in clear violation of the United Nations Charter and that potential war crimes had already been committed. Trump, in remarks Monday, suggested he understood the lasting impact of the attacks he was threatening. "Do I want to destroy their infrastructure? No. It will take them 100 years to rebuild," he said, adding that the only way Iran would be able to rebuild would be to utilize the genius of the United States of America. From the elections section, Democrats are turning Republicans' arguments against them in midterm races. Republicans won in 2024 by promising to cut the cost of living, but high gas prices are frustrating voters and providing a potent line of attack ahead of this year's elections. By Dan Merica, Harrisburg, PA. Janelle Stelson, a Democrat running to oust incumbent Representative Scott Perry, Republican, Pennsylvania, in a district that stretches across the central part of the state, stood in front of a mobile gas station where the sign behind her read $4.24 for a gallon of regular unleaded and over $6 for diesel. "Gas prices are not just a number on a sign," Stelson said at a campaign event Monday as a trickle of drivers passed through to fill up behind her. "Cost of living is crushing central Pennsylvania families, and our congressman is just making it worse." Stelson, a former local television anchor who came close to booting Perry from his seat in 2024, is among Democrats all over the country seizing on the spike in gas prices triggered by the Iran war. The cost of filling up a tank is adding to Democratic messaging about affordability, with voters already keenly concerned with the rising cost of living. It's quite the turn of events for Democrats. President Donald Trump and Republicans, including Perry, won over voters in 2024 by promising to bring prices down, zeroing in on concerns about inflation under President Joe Biden. Perry, a veteran who was first elected to Congress in 2012, ran ads in 2024 that knocked Biden over gas price increases and touted how he fought the president's energy policy. And until recently, gas prices had been something Republicans regularly boasted about. But the president's decision to attack Iran disrupted global markets and sent oil prices climbing. The events of the past few weeks and rising prices overall have left voters like Philip Fabres feeling screwed as he watched the numbers climb on his pump at his Sheetz a few short miles from Stelson's events. "The way I see it, no one is really concerned about John Q. Public anymore," said Fabres, a 64-year-old who voted for Trump in 2024 and works in the area. "I did really good in Trump's first term, but now I am screwed again. Most of my life I've been screwed just like everyone else." Fabres said he was willing to give Trump some leeway on Iran, arguing that the threat the nation posed needed to be addressed. "Maybe we shouldn't have started this thing," he said, "but what would have happened if we didn't?" The rising prices have put unique pressure on Republicans, given that they are the party in control of Washington and won that power with campaigns focused on rising prices. Trump has argued that the little glitch of rising prices would be a short-term problem and necessary to ensure safety. But in a profanity-laden social media post Sunday, he threatened Iran with hell if it does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the now constricted shipping corridor affecting gas prices. Democrats have since swooped in, focusing on prices in a way that boosted Republicans just a few years ago. He votes to hurt us, not to help us, every time he gets a chance, Stelson said of Perry in an interview, citing his support for the war and votes against extending health care subsidies. Gas prices are something that touch us all. It affects everybody, no matter whether you're doing it for work or for pleasure or whatever. It costs a lot, she added, especially when you're being squeezed everywhere else. Stelson must win a May primary to take on Perry, but she is considered the favorite in the race. The district that includes Harrisburg and York is one of the most competitive in the country, and in 2024, Stelson came within 5,000 votes, or about 1 percentage point, of ousting Perry, the former head of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. Everywhere, other Democratic campaigns are taking a similar approach. Vote Vets, a left-leaning veterans group, is running an ad in Iowa for Joshua Turek, an Iowa State representative running for U.S. Senate, that mentions rising gas prices. A spokesperson for the group told the Washington Post that the ad campaign will be expanded this week, bringing total spending in the state for Turek to nearly $2.5 million in 3 weeks. And Abdul El-Sayed, a liberal Democrat locked in a contentious Senate primary in Michigan, has been running ads about gas prices on gas pumps. You know why gas is so expensive? Donald Trump's $200 billion war with Iran, El-Sayed says in the ad. This shift in campaign messaging has been dramatic. In his State of the Union earlier this year, Trump bragged about what drivers were paying at the pump, claiming that prices were below $2.30 a gallon in most states. Weeks later, however, the average price per gallon has risen to well over $4, and most economists expect gas prices to keep rising if the conflict with Iran continues. If there's not a ceasefire soon, I would almost think that the increases could continue unabated, said Patrick DeHane, head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy. I don't see any real improvement in the gas prices until the strait reopens. Perry, in an interview with the Post, argued that the price increases are transitory and defended his support for the war in Iran as necessary to prevent the nation from developing a nuclear weapon. But Perry, a strident Trump supporter, acknowledged the impact of fuel costs on his constituents. Look, I don't like the high gas prices, said Perry, noting that he often drives to and from his district and Washington. I am not at all immune to high prices and being frustrated by them. When pressed on his support for the conflict, given the rising prices, Perry added, but I can't stop Iran from being a terrorist nation and threatening all of us. And the Republican congressman argued that his possible Democratic opponent in November was only using the prices as a political cudgel. Even I would agree that the gas prices are too high, he said, but is Janelle Stelson going to change that? No. Stelson said that if elected, she would push to end the war to address gas prices and Trump's tariffs on international trade to bring prices down on other items. When asked for other moves she would make, the Democrat took a long pause and said she didn't know yet what that would be. I look forward to learning a lot more about how we could make that happen, she said. Democratic and Republican operatives said gas prices play a singular role in the debate over affordability. While prices of eggs, milk, and other commodities may rise, they aren't posted in large characters on tall lighted signs on many street corners in the U.S., representing what Doug Hay, a longtime Republican operative, said was a psychological test for how voters feel about the economy. You cannot avoid them, Hay said. It compounds what was already a really bad issue for Republicans. J.J. Abbott, a Democratic strategist in Pennsylvania, said the opportunity for Democrats is that Republicans all ran on this key thing that they were going to lower them. These guys were very specific to voters, Abbott said, and that is the exact opposite of what's happened. Voters at gas stations in central Pennsylvania expressed frustration with rising prices, with some arguing that exasperation would make them less likely to vote at all in November. Many expressed feeling squeezed financially by the overall rising prices. Some said they have altered their daily routines to avoid using more gas. I just tried to return something at a store that I hadn't bought it from because I was closer to another location, said Pamela Situ, 55, who filled up her car at the station where Stelson was campaigning Monday after visiting a local Sephora. I didn't want to drive 2 extra miles. Situ voted for the former Vice President Kamala Harris in 2024 and said she wasn't surprised Trump didn't keep his promise on prices. He promised a lot of things, she said. Stephen Glass, a 74-year-old retiree who lives in Harrisburg, called the conflict in Iran a war of choice as he filled up his car shortly after Stelson spoke. Everyone is starting to feel the economic crunch, said Glass, who also voted for Harris. I'm looking at 424 right here. To me, it's outrageous. It is unnecessary. After the fuel pump clicked, Glass looked at his total. I only got $30, he said. That's all I could afford. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the Well-Being section, 5 ways to add a little inconvenience to your day and improve your brain. Making life harder sounds deeply unfun, but it might be good for your cognitive function. By Ashley Abramson. Thanks to modern technology, drafting an email, ordering a meal, or looking up that random actor's name you can't remember has never been easier. But some are starting to wonder whether the quicker, frictionless path isn't always the best. Do we lose something by not engaging our brains on a daily basis? There's a potential fix for that very modern problem: friction maxing. Catherine Jeser Morton used the term in a January article in The Cut, in which she argued that reintroducing challenges, say cooking dinner instead of ordering on Uber Eats, can help reorient people to discomfort and as a result make us more human. Well, you could argue that easy feels great most days. Experts we talked to said that living a frictionless life may not be the best for your cognitive function over time. It's basically having a personal trainer lift the weights for you, said Leela Landowski, a neuroscientist, lecturer of biomedical sciences at the University of Tasmania and Vice President of Science and Technology, Australia. We're not talking about friction for friction's sake. Call up customer service at any major corporation if you simply want more frustration in your life. But tasks like that can challenge you cognitively. We talked to 3 brain and behavior experts to find out how ease and convenience affect the brain and whether you should try a little more friction maxing. Here's what they said. Ease and convenience might affect the brain. The brain's number one job is to help you survive, Landowski said. Throughout your daily routines, the brain conducts a cost-benefit analysis to determine whether a choice is worthwhile. Challenges require more energy, so whenever possible, the brain prefers ease to difficulty. The brain also responds to rewards, such as the dopamine hit that comes with instant gratification. Whether easy entertainment during a social media scroll or perfectly written text message courtesy of Claude, the artificial intelligence chatbot. Our modern environment is set up to dole out these quick rewards. Easy things often feel good, and platforms have spent a lot of money figuring out how to keep us there, said Emily Falk, professor of communication, psychology, marketing and operations, informatics and decisions at the University of Pennsylvania, and author of What We Value. Over time, frictionless living could be detrimental, according to brain health researcher Mark Milstein, author of The Age-Proof Brain and host of the Best of Your Brain podcast. That's because brain functions such as learning, memory, and focused attention are use it or lose it. The brain needs to practice these skills to maintain them. If you're not regularly challenging your brain to learn, remember, or pay attention, he said, those skills can erode. Evidence from as early as 2011 suggests, for example, that people who rely on Google for answers have lower rates of recall. More recent studies confirm that easy-to-find information might affect the ability to learn. In a study from 2021, researchers gave 196 participants a multiple-choice quiz. Participants who looked up answers with a search engine scored lower compared with those who did not use the internet, even though participants expressed similar levels of confidence about their scores. These findings suggest that using search engines to learn new information may affect the brain's ability to effectively store information. Milstein said the same thing is happening with the rise of AI tools like ChatGPT. I hear people say they felt like their memories were better a few years ago, which is understandable in a world where everything is at our fingertips, Milstein said. In a 2025 study, researchers looked at 580 university students, 57% of whom used AI on a daily basis while the rest used it several times a week. They found greater AI use was linked to a reduction in critical thinking skills, possibly because of an association with cognitive fatigue, a depletion of mental resources essential for complex thinking. In another 2025 study, which looked at 666 people of diverse age and educational backgrounds, a researcher found that AI was linked to a reduction in critical thinking skills. Cognitive offloading, which is essentially using tools to reduce the cognitive load on your working memory, might impair the ability to engage in deep reflection. The benefits of friction maxing. As the brain ages, Milstein explains, it naturally loses connections between brain cells, which can affect memory, attention, and the ability to learn new information. Taking on friction-filled challenges, such as learning new things, is like investing in a financial account as you age, he added. Research on cognitive reserve theory shows these things can cause the brain to form new connections, which increases the overall reserve. The more you deposit, the less you notice the withdrawals, Milstein said. Falk believes the benefit of friction maxing lies in its potential for creating a more meaningful life, not necessarily boosting cognition. For example, the ease of writing an email with AI might make you feel good in the moment, but if you value communication or building social skills, Falk said, it may not align with your big picture goals and may make life feel less meaningful. When we make choices that seem immediately rewarding but don't take a step back to ask if those choices are compatible with big picture goals and values, we can get in trouble, she said. The good news, even if the frictionless pathways in your brain are well worn, you can take simple steps to override them. According to Falk, adding a reward, like enjoying your favorite podcast while you cook, can reduce the perception of friction that comes from cooking rather than ordering takeout. This may help you train your brain to repeat the behavior so it becomes a habit. When we set up routines and environments to work with our brain's tendency to want rewards, we can end up in a better spot, she said. 5 ways to try friction maxing. Your whole life doesn't need to be filled with friction, but Milstein said infusing your day with friction moments can help keep your brain function healthy over time. Want to try friction maxing? The below steps are a great place to start. 1. Try puzzles and games you're not good at. Puzzles and games can challenge your brain, but don't just play ones you're good at. If Sudoku comes easily, try a word game instead. You wouldn't go to the gym and only work out your arms, Milstein said. Your brain needs the same type of cross-training. 2. Learn something new. Learning a new to you, slightly challenging skill like a game, language, or even a new workout method, Milstein said, is another proven way to preserve brain function. Along with creating new connections in the brain, these challenges facilitate the release of the hormone norepinephrine, which helps sharpen focus and support learning. 3. Cook a recipe. Even 1 or 2 nights a week, make an effort to prepare a meal. Milstein said searching for a new recipe, shopping for ingredients, and following steps to prepare the meal can create meaningful connections in the brain. To add friction, put your phone away while you eat. 4. See a friend in person. Instead of texting or emailing a friend, call them or make plans to meet them. You'll need to remember how to get to where you're going and details about your friend, Milstein said, along with using social skills that strengthen your brain and your relationship. 5. Don't look up the answer. When you're trying to remember something, don't be quick to search for the answer. For example, introduce friction at the store by trying to recall what you need to buy as you walk through the aisles. Embrace the feeling of needing to take time to remember this instead of looking it up, Milstein said. A simple reframe may help. Rather than a way to add challenges, think of friction maxing as aligning your daily choices with your values, which can make your life feel more rewarding and meaningful. People tend to think of friction as negative, but you can also view it as intention, Falk said. Friction can be positive if it causes you to take a step back and think about how you want to spend your life. And finally, from the opinion section, by the editorial board, the backward logic of pharmaceutical tariffs. Central planners in Washington want to raise prices to lower them. President Donald Trump says America needs to raise drug prices to lower them. At least that's the logic of a government that wants to use tariffs to reshape the economy. The president decreed last week that pharmaceutical companies must cut deals to reduce retail prices. If they don't, he will impose 100% tariffs on all imported pharmaceuticals, as well as on the ingredients that are made or used by American companies. Trump doesn't have the unilateral power to impose price controls on drug companies. Instead, he is using the threat of import taxes to jawbone manufacturers into agreements that advance the government's agenda. That includes moving production plants to the United States or selling products on Trump Rx, the administration's drug discount platform. Drug prices in the U.S. are indeed higher than in other developed countries, especially in Europe, and Trump isn't alone in identifying this as a politically potent terrain. Socialists like Senator Bernie Sanders, independent Vermont, have wanted bureaucrats to run the healthcare industry for decades. Why shouldn't the government use all the tools at its disposal to make deals with drug companies, especially if they are voluntary? Start with the fact that the European prices that the administration is trying to replicate are artificially low. That's the result of the government restrictions or negotiated rates via socialized health systems. These policies make it harder for companies to invest in new drugs. They also exacerbate shortages across Europe and keep newer treatments out of the market entirely. The administration seems to understand these problems and has criticized Europeans for free riding on U.S. innovation. Trump is right that Europeans get access to our biomedical breakthroughs without paying full fare, and that's not sustainable. But this only reveals the underlying incoherence in his strategy. Trump wants European-style prices here while simultaneously pressuring those countries to pay more. Meanwhile, the administration's tariff strategy invites cronyism. Many larger pharmaceutical companies have already entered deals with the administration, though the details often remain hidden from the public. Some might be able to afford discounts on their drugs and would be happy to offer them if they can get special treatment for other products facing reviews by the Food and Drug Administration. Unsurprisingly, spending for lobbying by Big Pharma exploded in 2025. Also unsurprising are the enormous carve-outs in the tariff announcement. The administration has exempted generic and biosimilar drugs from the levies and said it would spare drugs for rare diseases from certain countries or that meet an urgent public health need. Judging by the stock market's lack of reaction to Trump's announcement, those loopholes probably are enough for most companies to get by unscathed. It might be a different story for biotech startups struggling to get by. And if this continues, many life-saving drugs might never leave the research laboratory to go into development. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 7th issue of the Washington Post. Your reader has been Cheryl. Thank you for listening.